Welcome to Common Sense. Common Sense is a series of shows that feature interviews with interesting people so that we can get to know them and learn who they are, what they do, and what's making sense to them and what doesn't. And do so in a way that's clear, concise, and direct. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing the award-winning Chief Magistrate of the Domestic Relations Court of Summit County and candidate for 9th District Judge of the Court of Appeals, Scot Stevenson.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it very much. You said I was an interesting person. I have a 20 and 25-year-old son. They don't think I'm very interesting, so they would not have bought that.
Well, for this show, you are an interesting person.
And we're also dealing with the fact that people have said I have a face for radio and a voice for silent movies, so this will go over very well, I'm sure, when we do this.
Well, thank you for your service, both judicial and your volunteer service activities, and welcome to Common Sense.
Thank you.
Scot, why don't you start us off? Give us some background on where you've lived, what brings you to Ohio, and I know you were born in Ohio.
I was indeed. I was born in Barberton. Well, actually born in Akron, lived in Barberton growing up. For a very short time when I was in kindergarten and second grade, my family moved out to Westfield Center. My father worked for Westfield Insurance, for a period of time, so we moved out there just for a few years and moved back to Barberton. And then for a short time, when I was going to the University of Akron, I lived up at the University of Akron area in Akron and ran for ward council once there in 1987 was the first time I ran for office.
Okay.
So I went to Barberton High School, played baseball in high school, and then graduated, went to the University of Akron.
Okay.
Both for undergrad and for law school.
Okay.
I was an honor student at Akron University when I went there, and then I graduated with honors from the law school from the University of Akron in 1992.
No, a ways back.
Yes.
Tell us about your volunteer activities.
Well, those started, some of them when I first got out of law school. I volunteered for a long time through the Volunteer Legal Service Project, through the Community Legal Aid in Akron. And when I was after law school, when I was at the Court of Appeals, my first job was there, we would go and work at battered women's shelters, domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, and talk to the people there and just give them some legal advice and help them through their problems.
Okay.
And once I started my law office, I was very active in the Volunteer Legal Service Project representing clients, doing community legal aid work there, which I found very rewarding, working with people individually and using my degree to help people. 3 times in 2004, 2013, and I think 2008, but the plaque doesn't have a date on it at all. I won the Volunteer Legal Service Project Pro Bono Attorney of the Year.
Okay.
So that was a passion of mine, doing that and working through that. I also served on a number of boards throughout my time in Barberton particularly, but the first board I was on was the Summit County Facility Review Board. And our job was to go in jails and review the jails in Summit County to make sure they were appropriate, working well, and things were safe for the people that were there. Then I was on Downtown Barberton Incorporated, or DBI, and that was like a lot of communities have organizations that are there to promote the businesses in the downtown. My law office was there, and we promoted the businesses and worked on trying to bring business into town and keep the business that were there.
Okay.
Hasn't been an issue in Northeast Ohio for a long time.
Right.
I was on a board called Barberton Area Community Ministries. I was a lay member on that board. And that provided services to people and helped them get linked up with services that might be able to help them. We had a food pantry and things like that.
Great.
After that, I was on the Salvation Army board in Barberton for a number of years. And with Salvation Army and the work they do, similar to the Barberton Area Community Ministries, helping people out, linking them up to services and getting them services. And then I also was a board member and the president of the Barberton Public Library Board. Like Avon Lake looked to me like we had our own library in town. This is a lovely facility, so I'm happy to be here.
Okay.
And love going to libraries. And all my life have loved to read. One of my first memories I have is we went to my mom took me to the Barberton Public Library. We were there, and one of the librarians gave me a book about dinosaurs. A lot of little kids love to read about dinosaurs.
Yeah,
It's sure very old and beat up, but I was thrilled to get it. And my mom worked there for a long time, so I was happy to be on the board and learn about that. it is a governmental entity. They get public funds. And that idea of how you deal with public funds, how you treat, how you do those things, how you deal with issues and complaints from the public that public servants have, is a nice thing to do, a nice learned experience.
Well, which of these, and you've named a number of them, was really the most interesting to you?
Probably I enjoyed the most doing the volunteer legal service work. I
Okay.
enjoy that. I
Helping
enjoy
people.
that directly helping people. The
Yeah.
other things you do, you're helping people, but it isn't as direct. And when you have that direct feedback with the person you're helping and using your ability and skill to help them through the legal process, which can be very intimidating for folks, particularly those that are low income and aren't expecting to have an attorney, that's very helpful to make sure they get the rights are protected, they get the service they deserve from the courts. I was always very happy to do that.
Okay, yeah. Change gears a little bit. What's the secret to having a long and happy marriage to Diana?
Well, if I knew that, I'd probably be doing something else and making my fortune on how to have a happy marriage. I
Okay.
will say I'm lucky to be married to Diana, who is a very tolerant, forgiving, and understanding person. And
Okay.
that's one of the secrets to find a
Okay.
tolerant,
Right.
understanding, forgiving person
Your
to be married
partner
to.
is,
Absolutely. When you're married for as long as we've been, which will be 30 years next year, if I'm doing the math right.
Okay.
At this point in time, you have to have that. Beyond that, you have the old Tolstoy quote that every happy family is happy in the same way. Every unhappy family is uniquely unhappy in their own way. Generally speaking, to me, happy families, one, there's a commitment first to being married. You're in a relationship with a person.
Okay.
You understand that's a partnership that is supposed to last for a long period of time. You don't go into it with the thought that, well, we'll see how this works out. And if it doesn't work out, well, then we'll end it. You go there with the idea this is for a lifelong commitment.
Understand.
And secondly, there's compromise, always is necessary. Both my father and an attorney in the firm that Diana was working at when she got married gave us the same advice, which was you're going to feel like you're giving 150% and your spouse is giving 25. And they're going to feel like they're giving 150%
Yeah.
and your spouse is giving 25. Because each of you are compromising and you're doing things for the other person and doing what they want to do. And you're giving of yourself more than you feel the other person is because you don't know the compromises they're making. And they don't tell you because they love you and they want you to do well and they don't make a big deal about it. They just compromise to try to make you happy. And lastly, communication. You have to talk. You have to have open communication. You have to talk about your feelings and how things are going and work through that. So those three C's to me are the most important things in trying to have a healthy and happy marriage.
Okay. Tell us about the steps you've taken in your career.
Well, obviously, the attorney, you go to law school, and before, when I was working, in undergrad, I worked at the Board of Elections for a couple years, and then I worked at the Summit County Probate Court for Judge Bill Spicer. So I had that opportunity, one, to be in public service, and two, to learn how a court operates. Probate court's a nice court to work for because they are their own clerk of courts. So not only do they make decisions, but they handle their own records. So you learn how records are handled, how they're retained by the court, that kind of nuts and bolts thing that's later on important if you become a judge or magistrate to know how things are done and how records are kept. And then I went to the Ninth District Court of Appeals when I started out, where I was a law clerk for 2 years and worked there for Judge John Reese at that time, which was a wonderful opportunity to get a wide view of Ohio law. Courts of Appeal deal with pretty much every subject. So over the time I was there, I wrote 150 opinions for the judge. So I got a good view of very different areas of law and what I might like to do and what I might like to do. I had been a law clerk also when I was in law school, working for Al Schrader and Marvin Shapiro and some other folks in Akron and doing work for them. So I had that background. And then I started my own legal practice. I had been around. I decided that was the best thing I would like to do, to go out and serve the community. Started in Barbara and had a law office with a few other attorneys, and then went to Akron and practiced with those folks, doing just general Ohio law, domestic relations, juvenile court, probate court, criminal cases both in felony and common pleas court, civil cases representing plaintiffs and defendants in property matters and personal injury cases, doing administrative law like at zonings, and things like zoning boards and things like that. So had a nice wide-ranging experience, did appellate work, argued at the 9th District and the 5th District and other state courts, and even the high Supreme Court once, which was a very exciting thing to do.
I see. Now, I know you've kind of mentioned it a little bit, but what criteria did you use to become a lawyer? What did you say to yourself, and why do I want to be a lawyer?
I think, I will say in part, and I've said this before when I was sworn in as a judge, I was really lucky to have parents that gave me a view that I was going to be well educated and go to college. It never occurred to me that I wasn't going to college. I never remember an opportunity when I thought, I guess I'll go to college. It was just something I assumed for myself, and I'm sure that's from my parents. It wasn't something at 9 years old I decided for myself. And it was done in a way for my brother and I that I never really thought anyone was pressuring me. It was just books were there, opportunities to read were there, talked about going to college, and that was always very helpful in the background for me. My mother had worked at the library, and my father worked, was the claims adjuster for Westfield, and I think that was something that he liked, the idea of being a lawyer. So I don't think he ever said that to us, but he liked that idea. So my brother, who is 4 years older than I am, Alan, is an attorney in Michigan.
Okay.
And I'm an attorney. So it wasn't like no one ever said be an attorney, but it's kind of what you did at some point in time.
I see. What are your present duties, and what types of cases do you handle as a Chief Magistrate of Summit County Domestic Relations Court?
Thank you. At our court, I specifically am a trial magistrate as well as a chief magistrate. So what I hear are, for Judge Katarina Cook, I hear not all the divorce, I hear divorces. She gives me some and she keeps some. So divorce cases for folks, either with children, sometimes without children. I do all the pro se ones because of my background, having been out representing people. She feels it's helpful that I work with pro se people and have, I think, a good background for that and understanding what their thoughts are and how to make them comfortable with the court and feel welcome when they're there. So I do all of those. I also, for her, do all of the child support contempt cases. So when people don't pay their child support and you come before the court, then I deal with the issues in a child support contempt case, get them, sentence them, and get them through the process, hopefully get them started to pay their support again and back on the right track. And then as chief magistrate, I also supervise, there's 12 of us, so I supervise the other magistrates, work on providing educational opportunities for them. We have a magistrates meeting twice a week, so bring in things to talk about during those meetings, issues that are important to the court and to them, and just general supervision of those folks.
Understand. Now, this is a question easy for me to ask, but kind of tough. How do you provide resolution to family conflicts? Now, I know family conflicts are going to be complex. They're going to be highly emotional. I think of Solomon when he had to deal with a child that, there was contested the term I'm looking for is supervision of the child was contested.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I will say in part it helps. I'm a certified mediator in domestic law and family law. I did certified mediator in general. So that helps work with people on that. But I think the first thing to do is, when you're trying to help people through their resolutions, is make them comfortable. Make them understand that this is a place for doing that. That this is something where they can tell us what they feel, see what their thoughts are, because a lot of times people come to court and their expectation is they're going to tell their story to the court. And oftentimes in courts, when I practice, some judges were much more, let me talk to the attorneys, let's not bring the people in, let's worry about the procedure, and the parties don't get to know what's going on. So I've always felt it's important to bring them on as early as I can, let them talk to me, tell me what their story is, and sometimes it's just telling that story gets them to the point they can talk about resolution. If they never tell the court what their story is, they don't. And then it's the opportunity of communicating with them, working through them, knowing what their issues are, trying to explain to them, importantly, here's what the law is. The law for domestic relations is relatively straightforward. For property, we're going to divide things up 50-50. That's what the law basically tells me to do. It says divide things equitably, then the case law says I have to do it 50-50 to explain why I'm not making it 50-50.
Okay, understand.
And before I do that, I take out what's separate property. And then when I'm done with that, I see if anyone has engaged in financial misconduct that says I shouldn't do things 50-50. So I explain this is what we're likely going to do with what the law is. You can tell me what you'd like to tell me, but that's what my obligations are. And for children, I'm going to follow the best interest of the children. That's my job. I'm not looking at necessarily what you want and what they want, but what's best for your kids. So I think you tell them that, they understand it, and you treat them with respect and help them work through their problems and help them get to the point that they understand that even though their relationship's ending and they're not going to be a husband and wife anymore, they still, if they have children, are going to be in a family relationship.
Right.
You're still mom and dad. Those children are looking at you as mom and dad, and you're their family. So you're not You're still in the same family. You're in your kids' family. So get them to understand that, and hopefully that works. But it's difficult, and it's even when you resolve it, people can come back because situations change. Children grow, your life changes, their circumstance change. So they come back at times and have to work through those issues.
Understand. Does violence get special treatment in these cases?
Well, it does in a number of ways. First, when I did my mediation training, there's specific training for cases where there's violence in the family to make sure you recognize that and you help work through that, because one of the things we have to look for in those circumstances, when you have a settlement, is it truly that person's settlement or there's some coercion involved? You know, when you've been in a violent relationship, you can at times be uncomfortable you're saying what you want, saying what you'd like to see happen, and you agree just to get things over with or avoid that violence. So it's important to look out for that. Certainly we're treating cases separate when there's violence, if there's children involved, and working through that and getting people help so that they hopefully don't have violence in the family again and work through those issues. But those are, so it can be more difficult.
What are the qualities of a good magistrate? Now, you've talked a little bit about them already. What are those qualities?
You know, I think the first to me is to understand that you're a public servant. When I practiced law, judges and magistrates, not all of them, but some, would take the view that you're here and it's my court, and you're in my court. And it's not my court. It's the Court of Common Pleas of Summit County. It belongs to all the citizens. It's there so people can have a resolution, not that I can put on a black robe and go to work for a few hours. That's why it's there. And it's there to help people work those out and understand our job is to help them come to a resolution. So that's the first and the overarching thing to me. You need to understand what your role is in the court and what your role is in trying to help people resolve their issues or try their cases if necessary. The second most important thing after that is to make sure you follow the law. That's our job. Any judge, any magistrate, that's their job. There's laws, they exist, we have to follow those laws. We have to apply them to the facts in front of us fairly and without bias. And that's the next most important thing for us to do with judges. And then just in your day-to-day job, I think it's listening, sitting down with people and hearing what they have to say and hearing them out, making sure you give them time to tell you what they want to do, in writing clear and concise orders. They talk about U.S. Grant, President Grant. He was a great general partner that could write great orders. And the last thing with thinking of President Grant is to decide things. Our job is to decide. People don't want, when they make something come to us, for me to take 8 months to decide what I want to do. They may need me to decide quickly. President Grant tells the story of, or someone who worked for him told a story, I brought him something, an order and some paperwork to look over. He took it, he got it, he read it, and he quickly started writing orders. And the young lieutenant said to him, wait a minute, this is very important. You can't just make this decision right away. And he said, look, my job is to decide with all the information I have in front of me and make the best decision I can. If I don't, time is wasted, and time is money, and it's valuable to us in war. We have to make quick decisions. If I'm wrong, I'll know I'm wrong as quickly as possible, and then I'll make a new decision and change my mind. But it's not to wait, think, it takes a long time, and that's my job too. Particularly in trial, I have to decide right there. But when I'm finished, people have a trial. They like to be divorced. They don't want me to take a long time. They want their case resolved as quickly as possible, and that's true of every area of practice. People want their decisions handed down to them fairly and quickly.
Okay. What are the differences between a judge and a magistrate?
Well, judges are, kind of the boss for us. They're appointed by state statute, so, and they're the statute out there that says there'll be 10 common pleas court judges in Summit County doing common pleas work. There's 2 doing domestic relations, 1 doing juvenile, 1 doing probate, and that's for every county. So, and there's 5 Ninth District Court of Appeal judges. So they're created by statute. They exist, they have to run for office, and they're elected for office. Magistrates are appointed by judges, so we work for the judges. They appoint us, we don't run for office. We have the same general powers and do decisions and work just like they do, but whenever I make a decision, a person can object to the judge and have it checked by the judge. Where the trial courts here in Ohio, they go to the Court of Appeals. There's a step for magistrates in between. It goes to the judges. The judge's obligation is to review it to make sure it comports with the law and fact before they sign it, to make it finally an order of the court. So that's primarily the main difference, but we act in the same capacity, and people often be confused if you're a judge or magistrate when you're in a black robe in court. They tend to view you all the same.
And sometimes it's the same outcome.
Oh, it is. It is the same outcome, absolutely. We make the same decisions. We do everything the same. Magistrates, will have a trial, they'll have a hearing, they'll make their decision. It just is approved by the judge approves it. Some judges, like in our court, will approve them right away, but I'll announce my decision, it'll be released the same time the judge approves it. Before she officially makes it, she looks it over, and it may take a day or two, but she does that. And some judges wait, there's an objection period of 14 days when I make a decision. A magistrate makes a decision, a judge has, the parties have 14 days to decide if they want to object or kind of appeal it. And some judges will wait for that 14-day period to go by. The statute allows them to do either one they want.
Okay. Now, you talked about it a little bit. Describe the differences between the courts in Ohio. I know, you talked about the Court of Appeals and the Common Pleas, and if you could expound a little bit on that.
The easiest way to think of it probably is that there's a level of trial courts, and they might be the Common Pleas Court, where they hear higher level civil cases and felony criminal cases. And then Common Pleas will often have branches like domestic relations, probate court, juvenile court. They're also Common Pleas. They're just separate branches of Common Pleas.
Okay.
Then there are municipal courts. And municipal courts hear misdemeanors for criminal cases, traffic offenses, first-time domestic violences, smaller theft cases, and smaller civil cases. Less than, I think it's $15,000 still is the amount, where anything less than 15 is in municipal court, and anything over 15 is in Common Pleas Court. But boy, I hope I'm right, because my wife is a municipal court clerk in Barbara. I hope I didn't get that wrong. And they'll hear evictions there too. But all those trial cases, they're people that are making the initial determinations in having a trial and taking the evidence and doing all those things at those individual and specific courts. If someone doesn't agree, they appeal that court to first the Court of Appeals in Ohio. So there's 12 appellate districts. The 9th is one of them. It's Lorain, Wayne, Medina, Summit. So our 4 counties. And they determine basically, did the trial court follow the rules and procedures appropriately? So if you're unhappy, you have that right to appeal, and you take it to the Court of Appeals and you lay out what you think the error was. There's a Court of Appeals, and then above the Court of Appeals is the one Ohio Supreme Court, which takes appeals from the Court of Appeals to again have that check to make sure there isn't anything wrong. Now, it's important in Ohio, the Court of Appeals, about 19 of every 20 cases that come from the Common Pleas Court to the Court of Appeals don't go to the Supreme Court. So the Court of Appeals is a court of last resort for 19 of 20 cases. So if you look at it, that Jose Ramirez got 19 hits in a row, that's a lot of cases out of 20. That's a large number. So it is an important position of the Court of Appeals that's doing that work. And the Supreme Court takes cases basically they feel are a conflict between the courts of appeals. If we can't agree on how to deal with something, then they take it to give the final word, or things they call of great general and public interest.
Okay. That's much clearer to me now. What are the responsibilities of a judge in the Court of Appeals? I think you've said it, to take these cases from lower courts.
In large part, yes. Now, courts of appeals, when they decide cases, will have panels of judges. So there'll usually be a 3-judge panel that will hear it. So it's not one judge. And I think that idea being that you get 3 people together, it even makes it a little stronger for that opinion making. Looking at having 3 people look at it to make sure they all agree, at least 2 of 3 agree. And the Court of Appeals do some small amount of direct actions that most of us don't think about, mandamus or quo warranto writs of prohibition and things like that. It's a very unique kind of cases. So it's a very small amount of original stuff they'll do, or the Supreme Court does. Okay. But mostly they do just that review work, making sure that the laws were followed, the procedures, law was applied appropriately, and all the procedures were followed appropriately.
Okay. Now, you've talked about your experience, which is just wonderful. Your experience as a Chief Magistrate in Summit County Domestic Relations Court, the Summit County Court of Common Pleas as a judge, acting as staff attorney, judicial law clerk for a Ninth District Court of Appeals judge. That's wonderful experience. Did all that experience prepare you for being a better judge of the Ninth District Court of Appeals?
Well, it helps. I mean, it certainly, all those things help you gain the experience to be a judge in all steps along the way. It's very helpful that some of that was trial work and jury trial, some of it was hearing work that I've done here, some of it's a lot of writing and researching what goes on at the Court of Appeals. So yeah, all that does benefit you to become a judge and work with a judge. Other thing that benefits you is age and experience to some extent.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
certainly I started as a small claims magistrate in Barberton and working part-time when I had my practice in 1998. And the first thing when you would go there, most of the disputes would be, a very common dispute would be someone had some work done on their house. They weren't happy with it. The contractor would say, I did everything I was supposed to, and they would say, no, you didn't, and you'd have these disputes. And you'd learn the challenge there of judging credibility of people, that you've never met before and how you deal with that. But also at the time I was 30, and when you thought you knew a lot, we're old at 30, and at 56, you're not sure. Seems young now at this point in time. But that experience, age and experience helps. Learning how things work, learn how to deal with people, learning to understand the law and deal with those things has all been beneficial to me.
Okay, I can see it, but why don't you tell us about why you're running for a position on the Court of Appeals as a judge in Ninth District?
Well, I was excited this year. I initially wasn't on the ballot, and Lynn Callahan, who had been a judge for a long time in Summit County and then on the Ninth District Court of Appeals, decided after the primary that she did not want to run, so they needed someone to replace her.
Okay.
And I was asked to do that. I was very excited because I do think this is something I've always wanted to do. I love the Court of Appeals, and I love the idea of the role of the courts in society, particularly the courts of appeals, how it's our job to make sure we follow the law, our job to make sure it's applied appropriately. If you go back to our civics classes we had way back when and talk about separation of powers.
Right.
The legislatures make the law, executive enforce the law, and the judges interpret it. And it's so important, that first part, the legislature makes the law. They're your elected representatives. Their jobs are to make the laws. And we have our Constitution that was adopted within the state of Ohio, and we add to that by voting. That's where the laws are made. The laws shouldn't be made by judges deciding, I would like to change what that is and make my own opinion.
Okay.
I've at least, I hope, at this point in time, learned enough to learn I'm not right all the time. I can make wrong decisions, and that I think that wisdom of people that we have by the legislature and their representatives is important for us to use and utilize. And that's why I'm excited to be running this year. We had a big year at the United States Supreme Court with decisions, and I think just having the ability to talk to people about that role of the judge so people understand it. You can get mad and not like what they've done policy-wise, but that's not the job of the Supreme Court. It's to interpret the Constitution and apply it. If you're not happy with what the law is, your job isn't to go to the Supreme Court, it's to go to Congress. It's to go to your state legislature and change it that way. So I'm glad to be part of the conversation this year on that, because I think it's very important for people to remember.
Okay. What is your judicial philosophy?
It's to interpret the Constitution as it's written, the laws of the state of Ohio as they're written, to make sure that we follow those laws as judges, to make sure that we interpret them appropriately to the best of our abilities to do the intent of the legislature. And then the other part of it would be to understand that, what my role is. And again, it's not my court, it's the Court of Appeals. It's the court for folks to use to resolve their cases. And it's important for me to understand that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not there to decide what I'm going to do, and make it what I want to be. It's about what they're going to do and help them get their case resolved and move on with their lives. I mean, again, it's frightening to have a lawsuit. It's frightening to go to court. If you're charged with a crime, it's frightening. No one wants to go through those things. To help people, treat them with dignity, treat them with respect, help them get through the process and get control back of their lives. Because when they're in front of us, they've lost control of their lives. You're going to have someone make a decision, and you don't have that control. So to get them back where they're in control of their own lives is very important to me, and that's an important part of my judicial philosophy, is looking out for the folks in front of me that are there.
Should a judge be concerned, and I think I know the answer to this, should a judge be concerned about factors other than the letter of the law, precedents, and the conduct of the trial?
Not particularly. I mean, there are very rare cases, I suppose, with the Supreme Court where they're trying to determine intent of a statute, and maybe they're looking at policy and trying to figure out what the legislators were trying to think of. But by and large, still, it's all in the component of what does this statute mean. I'm trying to interpret it. So I'm looking at maybe what the policy is, because did they really mean this? Is this what that made sense? So there are things that we consider canons of statutory construction, and that's part of a canon of statutory construction. But generally, no. Those are the things we're supposed to look at to make our decision. And it's very important. And I think it's very frustrating for the average person who goes to court, who wants to talk about what's right and what's not right. And I'll give a very quick example in domestic relations court. We often see a person who is upset because we're going through a divorce. They're the higher earning member of the household. The other side maybe wants to leave the marriage, and they're saying, look, why should I pay spousal support to this person? They want to leave. Well, highest factors for spousal support don't say whose fault is it. It just tells me what to look at, who makes what. So it doesn't matter to me who was right, who was wrong, who did what, who did this. That's not how Ohio divorce law works. If you think it should work that way, then you need to go to the legislature and have them change the law. But that's what I have to apply. So people understand, you have to explain that to people so they're not upset. I think you hear a lot of the commentary this summer was, I don't like the results. I think they made the wrong results. This is the right policy. Well, that's not the point. The Supreme Court applied the law as they felt, or applied the Constitution or the laws as they felt were appropriate. And if you don't like that, go to Congress, try to change the law. It's the same there, it's the same idea.
Okay. Well, what surprised you about working in the judicial area, if anything?
Well, I think the first thing is when you were starting out, is that challenge of trying to figure out, when you don't know anybody that you've never met, who is being honest, who's telling the truth. That's a challenge when it's the common pleas court, the trial court level, and that's your role to decide. And certainly can recognize people that have done that, or go on a jury and do that, and they have to make that call. It's a difficult thing to do. It just is. And then just secondly, I suppose, and learn more in practice, is because you go through law school and you learn how to do this and you're trained, going to court isn't necessarily intimidating to you. But it is for people who are going there for the first time and your client, and they're afraid to go there. They might be afraid for a traffic case. They've never had a traffic ticket before. And they're there, and when I was a Cuyahoga Falls traffic magistrate, you'd have some person who was 75 years old, had no traffic case, and thought this was, to them, was the worst thing they've ever done. It was terrible, and it's not. And to reassure them and make sure that we'll treat you well, this is what happened, and it's okay, and take them through the system so they're comfortable is important.
Understand. Of what cautions does a judge need to be aware of, both in his personal and professional life?
Well, I will just take one step back, and it's not something I worry about a lot, but we get a lot of talk from our security staff about people that might want to interact with you and harm you outside of court.
Okay.
We have a court at domestic relations where there are more emotions involved, and that could be a concern. And there have been some issues over the year in Ohio where there's been that problem. And I'm reminded that in part because of all the protests this year outside the Supreme Court justices' homes.
Terrible.
It was, and it's not something that you should easily have to go through, have those kind of threats made to you on a daily basis. You're trying to make a decision the best you can under the law, and those were, to me, bullying and intimidation tactics that shouldn't happen. So, I think we all need to be aware, those of us in the judiciary, or magistrates too, that we're dealing with things that are very emotional for people, and we have to be worried about that and be cautious to make sure that we're safe. And courts do a very good job. It's become a bigger issue for, finding entries for the courts, magistrates and judges go through that aren't used by everyone else, making sure they have good parking at our court, making sure they're in a place where there's security watching to make sure they're safe. And that's been a big concern. But that would be one of the first. And then the other caution is, it's a tremendous temptation when you're a judge or magistrate to do what you think is right and not follow the law. It is just there, and it's constant. You're in front of someone's in front of you. You feel sympathy for them. You feel that the way this case is going, they ought to win, but the law is different, and the law says what the law says. So that is a caution and something we have to do, and strive to avoid doing that. back in the 80s, there's a book my brother called me The Temptation of America, and it was a book about the constitutional issues going on then in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was, to me, part of that was that temptation of our judges to follow the law and not do what you think is right. You're there on the Supreme Court. You're extremely powerful. There's no remedy on what you say than to make sure you do what the law says and not what you want. Is a challenging thing to do. And it's there at that level, and it's there for us the same way, to make sure we apply the laws where required.
Okay, yeah. Should judges continue to be elected, or should judges be chosen some other way?
You know, I will say, running for judge, I very much enjoy it. I very much enjoy getting out, talk to people, meeting people, and hearing what they have to say. And I think there's some benefit to us to hear what people think of the judicial system, because you don't hear that a lot. I mean, the thing about being a judge, they say, and it is true, and even as a magistrate, it's kind of isolating, because you were an attorney and you were in this field of attorneys in the bar and you practice with them and you become a judge, and you can't talk to them as much because you can't talk about their cases and what they're doing because it might be a case in front of you. And there's always the thought that are people being nice to you because they like you or because they might have a case in front of you next week. It's no different than probably when you were a teacher and you wonder if the kids were being nice to you because they wanted an A, or they were just being nice to you because they wanted to be nice to you. So there's that challenge, and it makes it harder when you're a judge to hear what people really think. Our bar association, when you run for judge, ranks you to see, you know, if they're recommended to the people to some extent, each of us, so they know what we think. I was ranked excellent this year, which is the highest level, so I was very happy for that.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. In part, it's your own internal critic kind of makes you know how you're doing, and I felt, you feel like you're doing a good job, but it's nice to have some validation from other people that you're well qualified for the position you're seeking. I've always felt they should, instead of that, they should, after you're a judge or a magistrate for a few years, they should then meet and tell you how you're doing, which would be nice, in some kind of private way to say, here are the people that don't think you're doing a good job, and we can tell you that. The downside of being a judge running for election is we can't talk about a lot. I can't tell you how I'm going to rule about different things, because that would be prejudging cases. Judge Bond, who was a judge in Summit County when I first started, in a criminal case, you have your client plead to something, there's going to be a PSI would say, no one can tell you how I'm going to rule because I don't know how I'm going to rule yet. And you thought, she knows how she's going to rule. She's been a judge for a long time. She knows what she's going to do. But when you're a judge for a while, it's true. I don't know all the facts yet. I haven't read everything and seen everything I'm supposed to know, so I'm keeping an open mind, and I don't know how I'm going to rule. So I can't go out and tell people I'm going to rule in this way or that way, because I don't know what I'm going to do. I have to hear all the facts. The facts are, as a judge, brought to me by the litigants. I don't get to do my own research. I don't get to say, you guys have given me A and B, but I really want to know this, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to search this out and find out what the answer is. I'm limited to what's in front of me. So I have to look at just those things. So it makes it hard for us to campaign with those kind of things. We can't say a lot. We can't do a lot. And our rules kind of constrain us as far as that goes.
Okay. How many elections have you been through?
Well, I mentioned the one in 87, which I'd kind of forgotten until we started talking. I lived in Akron there. So I ran for ward council in 87 in the city of Akron. I then, when I moved back to Barberton, ran for state representative in 1998, I would think, that's other even years. I ran for law director in Barberton in 1999. I ran for common pleas court judge in 2010 and 2016 in Summit County.
Now, what was your toughest campaign? And my next question is going to be, what makes a tough campaign?
Well, probably it's in 2016 when I was running to keep a seat as a common pleas court judge, because as another judge said to me that year, it's a terrible way to keep a job. That's the downside of running for elections. You got to run around all over, try to talk to people about things you can't really talk about. You have to try to explain to them why you should vote for me, but I really can't tell you what I'm going to do all that much or what I'm going to do, but just please vote for me anyway. And it's hard to do that. And it's a difficult thing to do. It is enjoyable. Again, I truly find it enjoyable. I find campaigning enjoyable. I find talking to people enjoyable, hear what they think. But it is difficult when people want to ask you, well, what are you going to do? And you can't say a lot. I like this Court of Appeals race because I can say truthfully, what I'm going to do is follow the law as written in the Constitution, and that's my job to make sure we do that. So that's an easier one to do when you're a common pleas court. People want to know, were you going to sentence people? How are you going to sentence people? And you just can't say it because you don't know.
Okay. What advice would you give someone who is aspiring to be a judge?
Well, first, probably when you're young, read as much as you can. Learn to be a good and avid reader. First of all, because it's an important skill as an attorney. You have to read a lot. You read briefs, you read all the time. And secondly, the more you read, the wider range of knowledge you have, the wider range of experience and understanding you have about things, and I think that's very important. Secondly, I would say get a good education in United States government and what your role is and what you're supposed to be doing, and learn how to do that. And lastly, work on doing things as volunteer work. Get an understanding of your job is it's not about you, it's about other people. And an attorney, that's true too, it's about other people. And you're truly a counselor and taking on their issues and helping them work through problems and deal with what they have on their mind in their lives. Same thing as a judge, I think. You have to understand that the important thing isn't you, it's the people in front of you, and help them come to resolution, finding one by settlement, and if they can't settle, then helping them resolve their case as easily and quickly as you can.
What counties are in the 9th District?
It is here in Lorraine,
Okay.
Summit where I'm from, and then south of us, Medina and Wayne.
Okay. In summary, what makes sense to you and what doesn't?
Well, I will say, talking about this judicial race, what's always made sense to me is the role of a judge, what you're supposed to do, that interpreting the law, because it ties in with the whole thing we're supposed to be doing in society. We have, then again, the legislature, the executive, and the government. What doesn't make sense to me at the moment, it's just kind of, it seems to me I've grown concerned, happy running this year, with kind of a loosening of respect for the Constitution and talking about things like freedom of speech and this desire to not let your fellow citizens say what they want to say.
Understand.
You know, whether I agree with you or not, that old saying that I don't agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it, has kind of turned to I don't agree with what you'll say, and I'll fight to your death so you can't say it. And that's not what our society is supposed to be about. Everyone should have the right to say what they want and what they believe. And it's just those kind of constitutional rights that are, if not eroding, at least in society being forgotten about and forgotten that's how we have a civil society that can work together. We aren't going to agree about everything, and that's okay, but we have to learn ways to work together. And I think that's one area about when you become a judge, you're working in the law, is that's how we deal with things. We don't agree. You and I have a case, we may not agree, but the old idea, Shakespeare, you know, we can drink and be merry afterwards. You know, we can go on when we're done, and we can go be friends, and that's how we as a profession have worked through things. We're not always going to agree, but we can work together to help have resolutions about things. And that's important. It's important for society to have that view. We're not always going to agree, but we have to respect each other's rights. And the right to speech is one, but any other number of speech rights.
I agree completely. And I think the people of Ohio, of Lorain County, of the 9th District counties should all be grateful that a person of your caliber, with your understanding and patience and knowledge of the law, is running for office. And I wish you good luck in your quest.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you have any comments or questions, our emails will appear on the bottom of the screen. If you would like to appear on the show, or you know an interesting person that would like to appear, please send us that contact information, and we'll see what we can do about getting them on the show. Again, thank you very much for watching. Remember, seatbelts save lives.
The preceding program was presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.